We're in the midst of a huge transformation where peers, communities, and workplaces are all really melding into one. Welcome to Reimagining Company Culture. My name is Christina Giordano, she, her, and hers, and I am the Senior Partnerships Manager here at AllVoices. Today, I am very excited to welcome our next guest onto the interview series, Mia Ellis. She is the Global Head of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Mendix, a Siemens company. Mia, thank you so much for being here. If you want to share a little bit about yourself for our listeners, including your pronouns and when you were younger, do you remember how exactly you answered the question, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Yes, well, thank you so much for having me. First of all, my name is Mia Ellis. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And to answer that question, I very vividly remember wanting to be a veterinarian when I was younger. So I really loved animals. My mother did not want me to have any. So I always would just imagine that I would surround myself with animals when I grew up.
I love that answer. Fast forward to today, how has your personal journey since really led you to be in diversity, equity, and inclusion as the global head, specifically at Mendix, a Siemens company?
Yeah, so my family is very, very diverse. I'm the child of immigrants. Both my parents are from Jamaica. Obviously, I'm a Black woman, and my siblings are in the LGBTQ community. So I have many people in my life that have always helped me to kind of keep in the forefront that people are different and people have different identities and think differently. And then career-wise, I've been working in DEI for about 13 years now. I started in higher ed and being able to see the inequities within people who are trying to access education and then moving into healthcare, seeing that even more. And then finally in retail, where, understanding that representation was important. People were looking for people like them, brands that recognize that there's multiple bodies and skin tones and genders and physical, mental abilities that are consumers. And so all of that really helped to inform, the lens that I use in my position today. And right now I'm in tech, which is a new industry for me, but it still is relevant in the products that we're creating for people, and making sure that we're constantly scanning to say, who are we missing and whose perspective do we need to keep in mind as we're working with different customers and clients.
I appreciate you sharing kind of your story and also just your why for being in this work. I definitely think our personal orbit and who we surround ourselves as well really informs how we show up and our lens and perspective as you were talking about too. And I definitely think representation is important. I think creating equitable workplaces is something that a lot of folks are really talking about. And I feel like when we have these discussions, whether it's on this show or webinars, people want to know, how do we kind of measure if we are doing a good job? How do we measure progress? What are qualitative and quantitative ways they could think about measuring that sense of belonging at a company, knowing that we're not looking to check a box, but what gets kind of measured gets invested in?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first thing is to establish DEI as a business imperative. So as you said, I think in the past, most people look at DEI as a nice to have, and there's really no metrics around it. And as you said, what gets measured gets done. And so it needs to be treated just like a business function, which means that you're doing an initial needs assessment in the form of a demographic survey to maybe see what identities are present in your organization. And then quantitative data usually takes the form in a dashboard where you're seeing who's coming into the organization, when are they leaving, how quickly are they leaving, how quickly are they advancing in the organization. So that's the quantitative side. The qualitative side is really the focus groups that happen after that. So conducting focus groups or one-on-one interviews. I love observations too. Usually, I recommend, particularly if you have an organization where people don't necessarily feel comfortable speaking up or being honest, if it's an internal survey, if you have the funds to have an external firm or consultant do it so that people feel more comfortable being honest, especially in a focus group setting, or one-on-one interviews, knowing that someone who's kind of a third party who's not within the organization and the organization's really just kind of getting that data, I think is really important. So those are the strategies, I think, in terms of just collecting quantitative and qualitative data for keeping track of how people are feeling and doing it more than once a year too.
On an ongoing basis for sure at every point of the employee experience, making sure there's multiple avenues, multiple ways of really actively listening and demonstrating that you're listening as well. Mendix and Siemens is a global organization too. And another kind of question that comes up is what are the ways that we can intentionally think about having that global diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy, and not a colonial or a US kind of centric way of developing these strategies, which is a little paradoxical to equity in general.
Yes, absolutely. And this is one of the great things I do love about Mendix. My whole team is global. Like we're spread out between Singapore and all over Europe, in the US, all over. And it has caused me to really kind of be cognizant that DEI looks very different in different countries and different regions. So I found what's really helpful is to make sure that you have people who are passionate about DEI who are located in those regions. So you can create a council or some kind of committee where you're sharing, and really you can get those perspectives and have those local regional people on the ground there that can inform your strategy. The other thing I would suggest is, as you're building out tools, like for example, one is an inclusive language guide that I'm creating, and being very specific about the language that it's going to be focused on. Usually English is the connector language, so being really specific to say, this is for English, this is not to be terms that are to be forced on other languages. So different sounds and different tenses. There's gendered languages and there's non-gendered languages. So making sure that you're not really forcing different terms or languages on different cultures that don't exist, and allowing them to really do that on their own. And the third thing I would say is to be very cognizant of different regulations and laws. So in the US, in the UK, and Canada, you can very easily get demographic information and doing voluntary surveys. And that's not the case in other parts of the world. So there are, strict laws against asking people that. You can't even ask them voluntarily. And in some countries, people's, identities are illegal, if you are, especially in the LGBTQ community. So you don't want to put people in a situation where they're going to be unsafe. So it's really, really important to understand those things as you're strategizing, to keep that in the forefront of your mind.
Yeah, you really want to think about things in a meaningful way, involve people locally in the conversation, and understand that diversity in one region or one part of the world is very different than the US, which is very different than other countries as well. And
Yeah.
we know that having a global head of diversity, equity, and inclusion is important. Really investing in this work and making these commitments is really important. But I want to be really specific around, from your perspective, what is the role of someone in your role, and what is it not, especially since we know that one person, even one department, is not responsible to ensure that an entire company is equitable, is representative and diverse.
Yes, absolutely. And I always start that from that standpoint, when people start, talking about, oh, who's on your team? And I always say, everybody's on my team. Every single person in this organization is on my team, and I am on theirs. And so I really see my role as being very horizontal across the organization. So when you're thinking about not just talent acquisitions and recruitment, but product development, our marketing, brand, HR policy development, employee development, professional development, all of these things require a DEI lens. And so I partner with so many different parts of the organization so that they understand that DEI is not separate from the work. It is the core of us being able to do our work very well. What I would say it is not is another thing is that it's not an HR function. So I work really closely with HR, but our roles are not the same. And so we look at things very differently. I would say that even though they're working from a human perspective with policies, I'm looking at it from human behavior, how people think, org psychology, how emotions, how they learn, all of those aspects play into building relationships and communicating and treating people equitably and in being inclusive. So that's really what I'm studying in the lens that I'm using. So it is a very different discipline than just being in HR. And as you said before, I'm not a silver bullet. I don't join an organization and wave a magic wand and everything is done. It does take time, a very long time to change culture. And so in organizations where they're used to things being done very quickly, being able to change that perspective and getting them to understand that adjusting people's behavior and culture takes time.
It definitely takes time, and I appreciate that you addressed that this is a different function and opportunity for the organization to do better outside of people and HR teams as well. That's another kind of conversation topic that comes up when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and making impactful change. Everybody's on the DEI team. I love that, which
Yeah.
means everybody is responsible and should really be thinking about who am I leaving out of the conversation? Who am I developing this program for? How can I do better each day? When you think about accountability, how do you hold folks across the company, no matter where they sit, accountable to create an inclusive and equitable workplace?
Yeah, so I think accountability, I know most people are afraid of that word, but I think it's really important. It doesn't have to be a scary word. First, I always start with my leadership team. So when I interviewed at Mendix, I was really impressed. One of the things that I like a lot of things about Mendix, but one of the ones that really impressed me was that I interviewed with the CEO, the CFO, the CTO, the entire C-suite team, as opposed to just the HR person. And they were all very invested in DEI and were understanding that it is a part of the business DNA. And you need that for the accountability piece. People are looking to them to act as sponsors. What is important to them will be important to the rest of the business. So they are a big part of the accountability, especially to their direct reports and to the rest of the organization. The other piece of that is tying it to performance metrics and things that people care about and are constantly focused on. And so when you're adding that into a components of expectation for people leaders, or when you're working with people on your teams, then it stays in the forefront of people's mind and they invest time in it. And the other thing I would say is ensuring that when you create large DEI goals, that you want to make sure you have a system that follows it, right? Because it takes me 2 seconds to say a goal. But if I'm not mapping out an actual system to reach that goal, then it doesn't get done. And goals are meaningless if we don't have the system to hold us accountable to achieving said goal. So always make sure that those go hand in hand.
Absolutely. You can set a really great goal, but if you do not, you're not set up for success or there's no pathway to get there, then it doesn't have any meaning behind it as well. I definitely agree with that modeling behavior from executives. What's important to them is definitely communicated throughout the organization. You mentioned that everybody's on your team. You've interviewed with the CEO and the CFO. I'm sure you collaborate with all departments at the company as well. Can you share an example for folks listening of a project you worked on with one or more departments? What was the shared vision and the end result?
Yeah, so I have been with Mendix only for 3 months, so we're still in the middle of this project, but one of the ones that we wanted to focus on was building out an inclusive hiring training program for the leaders. And so I am obviously working with the people leaders. So before I develop a training, I want to know who my audience is. So I conducted some one-on-one conversations to collect some qualitative data. What are their expectations? What are they looking for? How do they grow? How do they learn? So that was a big collaboration with different people leaders in different departments. Obviously, the talent acquisition team to get their feedback, they're going to be the ones partnering with people leaders. And then when I'm designing the content and the training, I need to be able to have people to help me create it. So I know the content, but unfortunately, I'm not artistic and I can't take a Word document and make it look beautiful and interactive. So I partner with the design team and the internal comms team to help me with that. So, and that's just one project that I've partnered with multiple departments in the organization for, and that's just the nature of my role, to be collaborative.
And I think that is a great example because inclusive hiring really sets the stage for that entire employee experience, folks' decision whether to join a company or not as well, if they feel like they are going to belong, if the process was inclusive. We've also seen once someone joins, consistently auditing the employee experience is incredibly important. Business as usual has been out the window for a couple of years now, really invoking that creativity. Can you tell me about how you've redesigned a system to be more equitable over the past 2 years, whether it's a process, policy, or initiative? I know you mentioned you've been at Mendix for like 3 months now, so it could be here or at another organization.
Well, in my past role, one of like my favorite projects that I've done was I really redesigned our mentorship, or we didn't have a mentorship program, but rather than when the idea came up to have a mentorship program, I wanted to do something different than a traditional people at the senior level mentor the people at the entry level of the organization. And I thought of there being more of an opportunity to have a reciprocal mentorship structure, meaning both people are coming into the mentorship relationship expecting to learn from one another. And I did that because, number one, I want people to understand that no matter where you are in your career, your organization, you must continuously be open to learning. And you should be open to learning to people who are just coming into the organization because they have a lot of great insight, and they might be better in certain areas than you might be, and you both can learn from each other. So we've matched people based off of what they wanted to learn. And it was extremely successful. And I think employees who are just coming into their career, it really helped to them to feel empowered, that they had knowledge that they could share too. And it's not just one way. And it also helped in, I think, particularly when you have folks from marginalized groups, you know, the more higher up you go, the less diversity you have. So that perspective is extremely important where, you know, you telling me how you advanced in your career might not be relevant to me because we have very different identities. So, working together with senior leaders to create a unique way for me to advance based off of my experience was another advantage of having that reciprocal mentorship structure.
Absolutely. Mentorship has been really important to me in my career as well. And that reciprocal mentorship of learning from each other and still having that growth mindset, no matter where you are in your professional development, is so critical as well. We've talked about really developing sustainable goals, a strategy and pathway to get there. In terms of measuring progress overall, what is your philosophy on, keeping track of moving the needle towards diversity, equity, and inclusion and the success of strategies? Again, acknowledging that if we achieve a goal does not mean we're not looking to continuously improve in 2025 and beyond.
Yeah, so I think that some of the more specific metrics that I mentioned are play a really big part. In terms of, I'm not really a big quota person for the reasons that you mentioned. Definitely don't want to pick a number, and then if you are able to achieve it, people are like, okay, we're done. We always want people to continue to strive. So I think year over year measurements is important. So, if you did certain number one year, you're just trying to improve the next year, and it's not tied to a specific number. You also don't want people to feel tokenized or feeling like, you're checking a box just to get them in the door. And that's not a really good feeling coming into an organization and other employees telling you that. So I think that is something I'm extremely cognizant of as we're seeing how we're improving. And then measuring progress is in the way of, I think, listening to people and making them feel like they are part of the changes that are happening to them is another thing that I'm very conscious of. So if we're consistently doing pulse surveys and asking people what do they want to see, and as initiatives are coming out, it's this is what you asked for, this is what you wanted, and this is what we're responding to. That really helps to see how people are accepting different initiatives that you're trying to implement, and making them feel like, oh wow, this I am a part of this. This is not something just happening to me. I am a part of the change that's happening, and then seeing how that pans out, and how they continue to engage with future initiatives, which usually is very positive when they feel like they're a part of it.
Absolutely, bringing folks into the fold, having a conversation instead of just being more transactional and telling and talking about the changes, and really garnering that feedback as well. So everybody again has that ownership mentality, accountability to work towards a common kind of shared vision of a great place to work. Mia, I want to pass the mic back to you to see if there's anything that I didn't specifically ask that you want to share with folks who are listening, or underscore any kind of key takeaways of all of the things that we have discussed today.
Yeah, I what comes to mind is really just getting people to understand that, our organization and the way that we work have changed. And because of that, it's requiring different types of skills in the workplace. And there's a really great psychotherapist that I love. Her name is Esther Perel, if anybody's familiar with her.
Ew.
And yes, and she really talks about, her focus is on relationships, and she started working in personal relationships, but started realizing the parallels of people's expectations for relationships in the workplace. And so just like in personal relationships where you expect to be yourself, where you're authentic, where you want to build trust, where, it hurts when you feel betrayal or when somebody's not transparent or honest with you, the same takes place at work. And leaders and people who are leading teams have to really excel in that. And so in the past where that didn't really work and people got that from other places, now the professional or the personal is professional, and people expect those same things from their teams, their leaders, and for them to have those relational intelligence skills. And so we need to really lean into developing our leaders. And as somebody who's working on their fourth degree, I can tell you that those skills aren't taught in MBA programs. And, yes, it's important to be able to read the Wall Street Journal, but you need to look and research in other disciplines. You need to understand human behavior. You need to understand emotions research and org psychology and environmental sustainability. So you need to be more multifaceted as you're growing as a leader. And I think those leaders are going to be the ones that are going to lead businesses that have sustainable models in the future.
I'm also a fan of Esther Perel and had the opportunity to, in my old workplace, she was filming an episode of her new podcast
Oh,
around work, which was so interesting.
I
And
love her.
I think it's so interesting because psychology really plays into it. Our relationship to work is similar to other relationships. So
Right.
definitely plus one to that as well. Developing leaders is so important. Mia, thank you so much for being on Reimagining Company Culture this afternoon.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course, I enjoyed our conversation. And as a reminder for folks who are listening at AllVoices, we really believe in both employees and employers being seen, heard, and understood, and know it's a requirement for the business to really succeed overall. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.